and welcome to Brownie Ponders, in which I, an actual brownie, ponder over matters of philosophy, politics, psychology, sociology, and so on. Education. Everyone needs education. America agrees, but it's also capitalist. We don't need everyone being too smart now, do we? That could get expensive real quick. All jokes aside, America's education system, all the way from preschool to the doctoral level, has some major systemic issues that hamper or even reverse its growth and quality. In spite of that, many individuals from around the world flock to America for educational opportunities. Hopefully this video inspires them to make a slight detour to Canada or maybe Singapore. The problems with the American education system are multivariate and can't be summed up to one cause in particular, but we can examine the most evident and prominent trends and correlations. Let's break this down further, but before we get started, I will reiterate that all points expressed over the course of this video are a product of my personal opinions, perspectives, and perceptions. Don't treat it as fact because it isn't. I would also like to point out that this video will focus primarily upon issues associated with the K-12 education system. Before we criticize the American education system, we first have to understand what exactly it is. The American education system is comprised of primary, intermediate, secondary, undergraduate, graduate, and vocational schooling. Primary, intermediate, and secondary schooling are compulsory for all American children starting between ages 5 to 8 and ending between ages 16 to 18, depending upon the jurisdiction of each individual state, with some rare exceptions on the basis of religious, cultural, and ethnic practices. Primary, intermediate, and secondary school combined comprise pre-K to 12th grade. Homeschool, private school, and public school are the three established manners in which American children complete these levels of education. Any schooling beyond this point is optional. Undergraduate education refers to the first level of the larger collegiate system. Associate's and bachelor's degrees are included within this level of education. Graduate education includes master's, doctoral, and postdoctoral studies. Vocational education is an alternative optional schooling system that certifies, educates, and/or trains an individual to work as a technician or become skilled at a certain craft or trade in preparation for a more specialized technical career. Together, these levels and bridges form the American education system. The Boston Latin School, established in 1635, is the first public school and is widely considered to be the oldest school in the United States. Then in 1639 came the first North American public school supported by taxpayers, the Mather School in Dorchester, Massachusetts. In 1642, the Massachusetts Bay Colony made proper education compulsory, replacing the more traditional method of in-home apprenticeship and familial instruction. Much of this was made possible by the fact that Protestants had unusually high levels of literacy, allowing them to pass this ability on to younger generations. Many other colonies followed Massachusetts' example. By the 18th and 19th centuries, almost all American settlements had some form of a schoolhouse, some with multiple schools and academies and others with colleges. By the early to mid-20th century, virtually all American children were receiving at least the majority of a proper primary, intermediate, and secondary education. It was at this point that America was experiencing its economic boom and riding the waves of glory spurred by their victory in the Second World War. The quality and prestige of the educational system soared accordingly. Women, ethnic and religious minorities, and those of low socioeconomic status were gradually gaining better access to education and then pouring into the workplace following the wars and the Depression, forming an economic golden age of sorts that persisted into the 1960s. Then came the 70s and the 80s. These decades did a number on education for some specific reasons, one of which was the rise in unideal personal life conditions. Latchkey kids raised on packaged food and Star Trek were replacing the prim and proper households of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where nuclear, outwardly stable families were the norm, and as such, a sense of confidence in one's authoritarian systems and establishments was well formed. You see, when a person does not feel security in their own homes, this dysfunction spills into the more external parts of their life, such as their career, education, and/or social life. During the late 20th century, this is what took place. The Cold War caused a sense of constant insecurity, with children conducting nuclear drills and being introduced to the concept of stranger danger and commies, or communists. Rising crime rates and national security threats dictated that these dangers be introduced from a young age to impressionable American children. In this state of anxiety, children cannot be expected to perform optimally in the educational realm. As such, the quality of the education system began to erode. Before we move on, I would like to point out that this is all highly generalized and does not at all account for all of the minute details that might have gone into the beginning of the erosion of the American public school system. America operates upon a system of capitalism, or an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. As such, commercialism is an overwhelming aspect of American life. Consequently, children are being exposed to the consumer lifestyle from a ridiculously young age. There are ads on the videos and shows they watch, on the products they buy, the games they play, the books they read, and the music they listen to. Everything is marketing another thing, and who better than impressionable and immature children to tailor these advertisements towards? It is from this framework of materialism that children develop their values and identities. This all plays a part in undermining the education system. You see, education and capitalism are essentially at odds with one another. The consumerist lifestyle thrives upon immediate and excessive gratification of our base desires. Meanwhile, education is a long-term investment. Education doesn't feel good for most children in the short term, but it has been scientifically proven time and time again to improve our life circumstances in the long term. An indulgent consumer will not logically bide well with a responsible eat-your-veggies sort of institution such as education. It takes foresight, forbearance, discipline, and self-control to truly get the most out of an education, and consumers are not raised with these virtues in a capitalist society. These conflicting values are one of the largest contributors to America's failing education system. Take, for example, the Chinese school system. While there is plenty of consumerism going on in China, it is not the fundamental framework of their media. Intelligence and professional achievement are hardwired into the average Chinese child's mind from a young age, and so persevering in the academic world is not seen as nerdy or lame. Instead, it is considered enviable to enjoy and succeed in school. Of course, there are plenty of American children who greatly enjoy education, and plenty of Chinese children who aren't at all invested in academic success, but it's far more common in America to be bullied for being highly invested in one's academic achievements than it is in China. American children are instead applauded by their peers for going viral on TikTok and getting involved in petty crimes. This dichotomy is highly detrimental. Educators have it tough. All of them from preschool all the way up to doctoral school, but no one suffers more than public grade school teachers. They're underpaid, overworked, and horribly underappreciated. They're exposed to all sorts of danger and disease, and in return they're paid beans. The average grade school teacher in the United States makes $36,771 a year. There's some give on this, with some teachers getting paid $50,000 to $60,000 and others being paid around $20,000. Regardless, on average, they're being paid ridiculously insufficiently for the monumental task of educating the next generation in spite of all the dangers they face on a day-to-day basis. Many basketball players and models get paid worlds more than that, and no shade to their hard work, but I think everyone can agree educators are more vital to public development. Due to the growing shortage of teachers, educators are also being ushered into roles they aren't fully qualified for. Particularly in the context of low-income schools and schools with special needs students, staff are tasked with handling a host of issues they were never trained for, nor are they being adequately paid to undertake. This is not fair to the students or the staff members in question. It honestly baffles me that there are still teachers left in America considering the responsibilities they are being expected to handle. So to all the educators out there, bless your titanium hearts. I wouldn't take your job for all the apples in the world. I'm personally a big book brownie, but not everyone prefers this method of learning. In modern years, learning styles have gained a lot of attention. Learning styles refer to different modes of education in which an individual thrives best. For example, a child who is gifted in athletics might have a kinesthetic learning style. There are 4 predominant and universally agreed upon learning styles, including kinesthetic, visual, auditory, and reading/writing. There are many others such as musical, spatial, and so on, but we'll stick with the 4 umbrella categories I just listed for the sake of conciseness. The education system imposes a primarily reading and writing style of curriculum. This leaves many children distracted, bored, annoyed, frustrated, confused, and downright irritated with their coursework. And strangely enough, it was found in a study that an estimated 89% of teachers believed in matching instruction to a student's preferred learning style. In spite of this, there often isn't enough in school budgets to supply resources better tailored to various learning styles. And even if there was, there isn't a huge amount of development going into these resources on a credible level in the United States. Moreover, standardized testing is overexploited in the effort to determine a student's overall intelligence. The problem with heavy reliance upon standardized testing is that most tests of this nature are limited to the measurement of only a couple of skills through the writing/writing learning style, and is often administered under certain circumstances, such as a time limit that might affect certain students' overall performance. I've heard from many affluent brownies that it takes money to make money. This is an unfortunate rule that often applies to the education system. You see, the government doesn't just give money to schools. Funding trickles down through a couple of levels before reaching any educational objectives. Funding comes from a mixture of federal, state, and local sources. Federal dollars comprise less than 10% on average of educational funding and are often distributed between districts. This leaves the brunt of expenses falling on state and local dollars. This causes education not only to vary on a state level, but also from district to district. The problem with this is that some districts are able to generate more funds due to the socioeconomic majority of its residents. For example, districts with better quality homes will collect upon larger property taxes, thus tilting the advantage towards higher income areas. This perpetuates the problem of underfunded inner city and rural schools and favors suburban ones, regardless of whether or not the student body of underfunded schools is greater than that of well-funded ones. Underfunded schools have been found to yield a lower graduation rate, have poorer quality materials, lower average GPAs, poorly compensated staff, and outdated facilities. This is my own personal theory, but I think the education system might thrive better if there was something of an equalization fund. Basically, regardless of where a school is located, it receives a set amount of funds per student supplied by the federal budget. I don't think it's necessarily wrong to allow local and state sources to fund little projects here and there, like, for example, bringing an educator with a specialization in Native American studies into a community where there's a need for one, or something along those lines, but it might be problematic to continue letting something as varied as state and local sources decide who gets what on a larger level. That should be the responsibility of the American government, to ensure educational equity and minimize socioeconomic disparities. Hear me out when I say I'm confident affirmative action would be far less necessary if children in underserved communities were getting a well-funded education. There have been over 280 school shootings in America in just the year of 2022, and we still got a few weeks to go. Need I say more? I shouldn't have to, but I will, because unfortunately there are many more dangers associated with attending in-person educational institutions in America. Contagion is rampant. Apparently gathering hundreds of children in poorly circulated rooms for hours on end doesn't present the best conditions for optimal hygiene. School facilities are poorly sanitized, the bathrooms are disgusting, if functional at all, and the food is questionably prepared. Moreover, there's the ever-present concern of bullying. There's traditional bullying, which includes taunting, threatening, belittling, aggressing, insulting, and manipulating. Then there's the modern phenomenon of cyberbullying, where students can persist in their ridicule of one another with the addition of a much, much larger audience and an around-the-clock platform. You can escape school, but you can't escape the internet. It's no wonder that the average American isn't terribly bright, who would thrive in an environment where they feel their well-being is at risk on multiple levels. A very real concern in recent years is the sheer number of students using the education system. Specifically, grade school being compulsory has given way to many schools being filled well beyond their capacities. Some schools have taken to cutting school days in half, sharing textbooks, and full on just not buying new materials. Educators are stretched thin to accommodate very large classes. Each child's accountability becomes somewhat lost in such a large group where the educator can't logically pay each child the attention they deserve and require. And studies have shown that students thrive significantly better in smaller groups where they can ask questions and get help tailored to their individual needs. Furthermore, students may feel more encouraged and less apprehensive in small groups towards contributing to discussions and sharing more nuanced opinions. There are simply too many students, not enough educators, and not enough resources and funding to properly support them. Let's be honest, even if kids do have flawless attendance records and their school is properly funded, their curriculums are probably whack. Whack in the sense that they are poorly designed, ineffective, and far below what a kid in its assigned grade level should be able to handle. I understand that things change, and sure, maybe a kid nowadays doesn't need to take a typing class, but the fact that the average American adult reads at the level of 12 to 14-year-old child is unacceptable. It's fairly common that kids don't know the branches of the American government, how to count and handle money, read Roman numerals, write in cursive, spell correctly, and read words with more than 5 letters in them. And we can't just chalk it up to American children being naturally stupid. What separates them from any other child on the face of the planet fundamentally? It's not as if American kids are just automatically born with a lower level of intelligence. There's clearly a systemic educational issue that is hampering them from reaching their full potential, and a large part of that is the poor materials that they're given to work with. Much of the reason these materials are so poor is that in recent years, especially after the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, a major educational reform put in place by the George W. Bush administration, curriculum designers and educators have become accustomed to designing and administering materials that are honestly dry and unchallenging. This is because it's no longer the goal of the education system to challenge. It's now the goal to get entire classes through to graduation and to ensure they get passable marks on standardized tests. Let's be honest, education is not America's biggest priority. Change requires funding, and funding the education system would require a significant redirection of the national spending budget. At this point in time, spending on the education system has essentially stagnated. Not much is being put in, and expectedly, not much is coming out. Current issues include safety hazards, poorly designed curriculums, underqualified and overworked educators, inequitable funding, unmotivated students, and uninvolved parents. While it's pretty normal for any education system to suffer from a couple of larger issues, the American education system's issues are beginning to outnumber its benefits, and if we continue on this trend, the future of the country is going to look a lot darker and stupider. Thanks for taking the time to hear me out, even though I'm blatantly insulting you yet again. That is, if you are a product of the American education system. Read a lot of books, because reading can help bridge the monumental gap between the average American's intelligence level and the rest of the world. Let me know in the comments if I missed any prominent issues with the American education system. I hope you'll let me consume more of your precious time in the future. That's all for now, and have a great day.